A big part of successful rhetorical analysis is just being able to clearly identify what a writer does. Yeah, it's really important because that's how you lead off the analysis. And if you're not clear in the very beginning, it's really hard for anyone to understand what it is you're trying to prove. So the most natural way to identify what someone does is typically through use of verbs, right? Verbs communicate action. Doing something, the author doing something, that is an action. So this choice feels very natural to us. However, I have found that using verb phrases to identify rhetorical techniques creates problems. The many essays that I've read over the years from students, I've seen that when they use verbs to identify techniques, that tends to promote ambiguity in their writing, which makes the rest of their analysis unfocused and difficult to follow. And it also makes it very easy for them to slip from analysis into just summarizing what the author says, which is an automatic failing score on the rhetorical analysis essay. This is why I recommend using noun phrases instead of verb phrases to identify rhetorical techniques. Using a noun phrase forces you to establish something more concrete at the start of your analysis, which gives you a sort of anchor to refer back to in order to remain focused with your analysis. It also prevents you from accidentally slipping into summarizing instead of analyzing. Fortunately, converting verbs into nouns is pretty common in English. We do it all the time. Nouns, after all, are used to name things. Even actions can be described as concepts. So every verb in English has a corresponding noun. For example, if I were to use the verb ran, she ran around the block, I could convert that verb into its noun form and say she went on a run around the block. Or if I said he listed ideas, I could convert that verb list into he created a list of his ideas. And you can do this with any verb, although some are a little less awkward than others. Warning. When you rephrase statements like this, by turning the verbs into noun phrases, they do tend to sound more awkward and wordy. And that's because you're forcing yourself to write in an unnatural style. You're forcing a noun to do the work of a verb. And oftentimes the verbs you do end up using, things like make, use, create, are very hollow sounding and not very specific. And good prose is often very reliant on using good verbs. And make, use, create, those are not good verbs. So in general, what I'm telling you to do here is generally bad writing advice. Don't use this little trick for anything other than identifying techniques in a written analysis. In fact, for everything else you write, you should do the opposite. You should look for ways that you can convert nouns into more active, vivid verbs in the case of if you're using really hollow-sounding verbs like make or use or put or do or things like that. So again, this technique only works for this one instance, and for everything else you want to do the opposite. I want to look at some examples here just to make sure we all know what I'm talking about. So this is some examples of verb phrases and their corresponding noun phrases as you would see in like a rhetorical analysis. So for instance, if you were to say the writer appeals to pity, you're using a verb phrase there. Try to convert that into a noun phrase by saying the writer makes an appeal to pity. Another verb phrase would be the writer compares this to that. Try to convert that into the writer draws a comparison between this or that. Or if you said the writer tries to appear good-willed, change that to say the writer creates a good-willed persona. On the next slide, I've got a helpful handout on using noun phrases to identify rhetorical techniques, including some tried and true methods for identifying techniques based on the three means of persuasion.